Hey everyone, we're going to do an update on a number of different issues that are taking place with Iran, things that are going on internally and with the United States and the Straits of Hormuz and all of that. So let's just get right to it. Let's pull up the headlines and start ourselves off here. First of all, I just feel that we have to be talking about these aspects of the war more, of what's going on in Iran, the suppression of the Iranian people, giving a voice to them. I made a few videos over the last few weeks about the executions that are going on, and now we see another human rights abuse. Iranian photojournalist faces 15 years in prison over images and reporting. And this was reported just yesterday. Acclaimed 2 days ago, acclaimed Iranian photojournalist Yalda Moayeri has spent much of her career documenting moments of dissent and the lives of women in Iran. The work has repeatedly brought her into conflict with the authorities, and on Iran's National Journalist Day on Saturday, she learned she had been sentenced to 15 years in prison. The sentence was handed down under a law enacted after the 12-day war between Israel and Iran in 2025, legislation that Iranian authorities say is intended to combat espionage and cooperation with hostile states. According to the handwritten notes reviewed by Reuters, the accusations against her include giving interviews to media outlets deemed hostile by the authorities and providing photographs to organizations linked to the U.S. and Israel. Reuters could not independently verify the contents of the charge sheet. In a statement provided to Reuters, Moayeri said the intelligence wing of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps raided her home during anti-government protests in January, confiscated her phone, laptop, and other electronic equipment. She said IRGC officers returned after the U.S. launched airstrikes on Iran this year and again seized her belongings. Moayeri had previously been imprisoned for her work. She served 2 years in Garchuk prison, a place she had previously photographed. In 2022, she spent 3 months in jail and was sentenced to 8 years in prison for covering the nationwide women life freedom uprisings that erupted after the death of a young Iranian woman, Mahsa Amini, in police custody. An amnesty later reduced the sentence, but she said the case continued to expose her to questioning by authorities. So we have more suppression. I wanted to lead the video with that just to give voice to this brave journalist who is now facing a massive prison sentence for really just exposing the truth about what's going on in Iran. Yalda Moayeri, she deserves our prayers and our thoughts, and to tell people about her cause. Okay, Iranian MP warns of severe drug shortages and price hikes. So I want to spend a few minutes right now talking about the situation domestically. So I did an interview on the Israel 365 news channel a couple days ago with Jonathan Sayeh, who's a researcher at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, an important think tank in Washington. And he's of Iranian origin. And we talked a little bit about the hardship going on with the Iranian people internally. And I wanted to focus in on that. So drug shortages and price hikes. Homayun Samayeh Najafabadi, a member of the Iranian parliament's Health and Medical Commission, warned of severe medicine shortages and dramatic price surges across Iran, noting that international money transfer barriers and soaring import expenses have further complicated drug procurement. Okay, he said the situation is extremely critical. Regrettably, we are facing acute drug shortages alongside eye-watering price increases. So you have shortages and inflation. He also highlighted the emergence of black market for scarce pharmaceuticals. He explained that black market middlemen acquire specialized drugs from state distribution centers using multiple prescriptions only to resell them at exorbitant markups to desperate patients. So they're facing a drug shortage. And we also have this, Iran's non-oil, this is from today. This is a story that dropped today. Iran's non-oil trade drops 30% due to war and maritime blockades. We always focus on the oil, but there's a lot more to their economy. Iran's non-oil trade value dropped by approximately 30% during the past 4 months, driven by armed conflict and severe disruptions to maritime transport routes. According to Islamic Republic of Iran Customs Administration data, Iran's non-oil trade value stood at approximately $34 billion during the first 4 months of 2025. That's before the 12-day war. Of this total, $16.5 billion was non-oil exports and $17.5 billion was imports. Applying the reported 30% contraction to last year's baseline indicates that Iran's non-oil trade volume shrank to approximately 24 billion during the first 4 months of the current year, a loss of roughly 10 billion compared to the same period in 2025. And customs records show that their trade value was already suffering from a downward trajectory before this war. I made a video about the Iranian economy. Also, besides the interview with Jonathan, I made a video about the Iranian economy last week, I think. Yeah, I think it was last week, where I talked about how their economy was in terrible shape even before the war started. And it only got that much worse. China, now this I found interesting. China, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, and Turkey rank as Iran's top non-oil export destinations during the first 4 months of 2025, while the UAE, China, and Turkey serve as the primary origins of Iranian imports. The UAE, China, and Turkey. Now, China and Turkey both have the ability to ship things over land into Iran. So the blockade, the shipping blockade, does not necessarily affect them. It affects them somewhat. We'll get into that in a moment. But we've already talked about the overland trade routes that Pakistan opened, 6 overland trade routes that they opened after the ceasefire, when the Americans put the blockade on in April. And that was predominantly in order to move Chinese goods that come into Pakistan on their way to Iran. The TPOI deputy had noted that following restrictions across southern maritime corridors, land-based transit routes are increasingly being utilized for freight transport. However, shifting cargo to overland transit threatens to significantly drive up trade costs, because it says here that it costs approximately 4 times as much to ship goods over land from China into Iran than it does to ship them at sea. So the blockade, Trump's blockade is not hermetic. We've talked about that. Because of these overland trade routes, Chinese goods are still making it into Iran, but it's driving massive price hikes. So there's shortages somewhat, or to a great extent, there are shortages. We see this also with the pharmaceuticals, as I just showed you. And there is the blockade. The blockade is not hermetic, but even the Chinese goods that are getting in, they are far more expensive. Iran faces 20 million liter daily fuel shortage. There have been gas lines in Iran. Iran faces 20 million liter a day daily fuel shortage. And you might wonder why an oil producing nation can have fuel shortages. They can still produce oil domestically even if they can't ship it. Well, their refineries are old and not maintained, and they have terrible infrastructure. And that's part of why they often have fuel shortages and energy shortages in Iran, even though they produce crude oil. In any event, so you see they have a massive gap in the amount of liters of oil they need, of fuel that they need per day. So the fuel, the pharmaceuticals, the fact that that their non-oil trade has dropped by 30%. These are all some indicators of where they are. Now let's get to the Strait of Hormuz. Before we get into that, let's just remind you of a very important event that we're hosting on Sunday. Mamdani's New York City, a warning to America, a webinar you do not want to miss. Mayor Rudy Giuliani, former mayor of New York City, will be on our panel, along with Shabbos Kestenbaum, Ariella Novik, who's a great investigative journalist, Robert Spencer, the prolific author, and Rabbi Daniel Schoenbach, who's been at the forefront of pushing back on Mamdani's policies that have been so damaging to the Jewish community. He's been involved in all of that in New York, and they're going to be joining us on this amazing webinar. Make sure you register. It's 2 p.m. Eastern time on Sunday, 9 p.m. in Israel. But if you can't make it, so long as you're registered, you will get a link in your inbox with the full, to watch the full webinar on your own time. So make sure you're registered. You can register by clicking the link in the description of this video, or Israel365.com/Mamdani, or scan the QR code that is on your screen. Okay, let's get back to these stories. So let's get to the Strait of Hormuz now, what's going on politically. So we have this headline from today: tanker struck by drone while transiting the Strait of Hormuz, UK MTO said. And this is just from today, just from a few hours ago. I'm sorry, this was from Thursday. It was from yesterday, but it was just reported that a tanker was struck. And the Iranian state media gave more details on it on this UK MTO report. The UK MTO reported on Friday that it received reports of a security incident involving an oil tanker off the coast of Oman, and it says where, and here it says where it was hit. It says that it was that the tanker was struck by an unmanned aerial vehicle that's a drone while exiting the Strait of Hormuz in waters near the port town of Qasab, and they included a helpful little map here. You see, Qasab is in Oman, which means that this was a tanker that was transiting the Strait of Hormuz in the southern route that the U.S. and Oman opened up, and that's where Iran does not want anyone using that route. So they struck this tanker there, and they put this out on their media because this is their way of reminding everyone that the Strait of Hormuz is closed and that they control it. They're still doing this every day. The UAE condemns hostile Iranian attack on 2 vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. And the big question this raises for me is, remember when Trump said a couple of weeks ago, for every ship that they hit, we're going to take out one of their bridges. Well, where is all that right now? We're not seeing the bombing, which, to the Iranians, what this means is that now they're still attacking ships in the Strait of Hormuz, and they're getting away with it because they're not being attacked by the Americans. I mean, I don't think that they should be attacking the bridges anyway. I've said this many times. It should be every time you hit a ship, one of the leaders of the IRGC will die, or one of the members of parliament will die, or one of some other, threaten them. Threaten the regime people themselves. Decapitation strikes. Say that, that's what they should be doing. In any event, UAE condemns hostile Iranian attack on 2 vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. So the United Arab Emirates, 2 ships from the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company were hit. No injuries reported, but they were transiting the Strait of Hormuz, and this was all this was reported today. Shipping traffic falls further in Strait of Hormuz as U.S. and Iran compete over claims to control. The Strait of Hormuz is under Iran's control and management. That's what they claim. That's what the new head of the Basij said. Shipping traffic at the Strait of Hormuz fell below the monthly average towards the end of the week due to volatile sentiment between the United States and Iran, with both countries making competing claims over its control. The Strait of Hormuz is under Iran's control and management, the recently appointed head of Iran's Basij paramilitary unit said on Thursday. Meanwhile, the United States on Thursday said it could maintain a naval blockade of Iran indefinitely and would ratchet up economic pressure on Tehran as ceasefire talks have floundered. And on that point, let's watch this clip of Scott Bessent, the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, who was on Newsmax yesterday.
From epic fury to economic fury, and at the president's orders, we have raised the level even again. And watch this space for more announcements coming next week, because we are going to apply measures like have never been seen in the history of economic isolation on a country. And we went from epic.
So there you go. So that's Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying that this is going to be unprecedented new levels of economic isolation, and they're going to be really hitting them hard economically, and it's going to be a whole new ballgame next week. He's not a guy who's prone to hyperbole. He's kind of a straight-talking guy. So we could be seeing a real ratcheting up of the economic pressure. And this fits with Trump's messaging over the last couple of weeks, because in Trump's messaging, while he has this frustration over Hormuz, and there's been this kind of like dilly-dallying about strikes, which, again, I kind of agree with. The strikes weren't really doing what you need to do. He has been constantly touting the fact that the economic pressure is so intense and is working and is really, the most effective thing, and the blockade and all that. So ratcheting up the economic pressure is a way to wage war on the Iranian regime without actually doing anything kinetic that could cause further spikes in oil prices. Is also very unpopular at home. So this is interesting. It's an interesting declaration from Scott Bessent of what is coming next. And we'll certainly be watching for it. And Secretary of War Hegseth also said yesterday that we can, and that's the quote that you saw in the last piece that I just read, that we could keep the blockade on indefinitely. But, this battle over who's controlling the Strait of Hormuz is a bit of a propaganda war. Like, Trump keeps saying we fully control it. The Iranians say, no, we control it. And that's why the Iranian regime always publicizes when they attack vessels, which reminds us of the fact that they're not interested. They're not trying to pretend they're not attacking vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. They're saying they're attacking them. They don't want de-escalation. They actually don't want a ceasefire at all. They want things to remain in a state of escalation, in a state of sort of or I shouldn't say escalation, in this kind of like low boil, but like still bubbling. They want the price of oil to be as high as possible. They want the economic pain on Trump. They want Trump to look like a loser and look like someone who failed, who's not achieving his objectives. That is their strategic goal right now for the next little while. Their strategic goal is make Trump lose the midterms, weaken Trump. Like I'm sparring with someone and I don't know if I'm going to win but I see downrange that I could make him weaker and then fight him on better terms. That's better. That's what they're doing. They're trying to weaken Trump in the midterm so that they can get to the other side of the midterms and they'll still be dealing with Trump, but they'll be dealing with a more weakened Trump. That's what they're working to do right now. So they're not going to make a deal. They do not want to make a deal. Next time you hear anyone from the administration say that the Iranians are dying to make a deal, no, they are not. I've said it many times. Repeat after me. They do not want to make a deal. They want to negotiate. There's a big difference. They want to negotiate indefinitely, but they're not interested in any deals. So here we have this headline. Oil prices fall after U.S. says crude exports through Strait of Hormuz near 9 million barrels a day, but it's not so clear. Oil prices fell Thursday, that's yesterday, after Energy Secretary Chris Wright claimed that exports through the Strait of Hormuz are higher than many independent estimates. Oil exports through Hormuz have neared a 7-day average of 9 million barrels a day, Wright said Wednesday. Exports from the Gulf rise to around 15 million barrels per day when pipeline flows are included, he said. About 20 million barrels per day of oil and products moved through Hormuz before the war. Okay, so you got that? 15 million barrels was the norm before the war. The Americans are claiming it's now 9, but the export data provided by the Energy Secretary is much higher than the estimates of many independent firms. TD Securities, for example, has put Hormuz exports at around 5 million barrels per day. This is nowhere near enough for the market, said Ryan McKay, director of commodity strategy at the firm in a Wednesday note. In other words, before the war, it was 20 million. And the pipelines were not used all that much before the war. The Saudis have this pipeline that has a capacity of like 5 to 7 million barrels per day, but they were barely using it before the war. And now they've ramped up use of it, and they're trying to expand its capacity. But look what it says here. If it's true, right, that there's 9 million barrels per day transiting the Strait of Hormuz, plus you also have the pipeline flows, and it's not just the Saudi East-West pipeline, it's also the Emirati. The Emiratis also have a pipeline out of the Gulf. So that could get up to 15, which is not so far off of the 20 million. I mean, it's 5 million barrels per day. That's unaccounted for, but it's not like the world is getting choked. But independent estimates have the number not at 9 million that's coming out now, but more like 5. Okay, so there's some dispute about, this could be more of the Trump administration's messaging, trying to always say everything's fine, the straits are open, lots of oil's coming out. Trump's messaging consistently, and those of his deputies, and that of his deputies, has been designed to push oil prices down. So we have the energy secretary claiming that 9 million barrels are coming out every day. Maybe it's accurate, maybe it's not accurate. They say they have more accurate numbers, right? Like he says here, Wright said in a social media post Wednesday that the U.S. military and Department of Energy maintain the best available data related to oil and oil products leaving the Arabian Gulf. So they say that they know better. But you see what the claim is. And on the Iranian side, here's from Iranian state media today from Tasnim. This is the IRGC media outlet. IRGC Navy chief Hormuz Strait remains closed. You see, they're trying to project it. So it's not just about what's actually happening. It's also about the messaging. The Iranians want a message that the strait is closed. That'll make shippers hesitant to use it. That will bring down the amount of oil coming out of the strait. And fire on a few ships here and there, and that'll make oil prices go up. The commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy said the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Our control over movements is complete and decisive. IRGC Navy Commander Rear Admiral Ali Ozamai said, no movement in this strait escapes the eyes of the IRGC Navy fighters. The reality should be seen in the field, not in the communiques and statements of U.S. officials. Okay, so we have a battle between over the messaging. The big thing to look for right now, in my opinion, the big thing to watch for is what Scott Bessent was talking about. And he even put a date on it. He said next week. Next week, he says, watch, by next week, we're going to ramp things up. It's going to be totally different. It's going to be economic isolation and pressure like no one's ever seen before. Okay, I'm interested. I'm waiting. I got my popcorn. We're ready to go. Let's see what the Americans have in store. That's one thing we're looking downrange for. We also need to talk about the human rights abuses that are going on in Iran. We should not forget the Iranian people. And that's why I led off with, with that journalist. Let's remember her name again, Yalda Moayeri. Yalda Moayeri, who has been sentenced to 15 years in prison. Let's not forget her. But also the hardship of the Iranian people. The economic hardship is ratcheting up. This is not a static situation. And the economic pressure, the pharmaceutical shortages, the lack of trade, we talked about the fuel shortages. All of this helps in pushing things towards a point where the Iranian people may very well actually rise up. Or at least it could play a role. So that's our Iran update for today. Hope you found it useful. That'll be it for me for this week. And keep watching. Make sure you're signed up for the webinar, and God bless.